Running at night had always been my way of disconnecting. My daytime life was dedicated to my family, taking care of my kids, preparing breakfast, taking them to school, doing all those tasks that many consider routine but which to me are fundamental. My wife works long hours, so the daytime responsibilities fall on me, and I don't mind it at all. In fact, I enjoy the closeness with my children, those moments when I can teach them simple things, share laughs, and make sure everything is in order. But the accumulated exhaustion at the end of the day, between duties, schedules, and obligations, always required some form of escape. The night was mine. After the house quieted down, when the murmur of children's voices faded, when the lights went out and silence enveloped every corner, I prepared for my ritual. I laced up my running shoes and went out for a run. It didn't matter if it was cold or if the wind howled through the empty streets. Running at night gave me the respite I couldn't find during the day. It was my moment. The world seemed different at those hours. The deserted streets, the streetlights casting long, thin shadows, the cold air hitting my face and reminding me I was alive. It was a space of freedom, where the only sound was my feet pounding the pavement and the steady rhythm of my breathing. On those nights, I could afford to forget, if only for a moment, the weight of the day, the constant responsibility of being the pillar of my family. I found myself in the middle of the darkness, in that limbo between everyone else's sleep and my solitary wakefulness. Running at night had an almost meditative effect on me. Sometimes, the soft hum of the sleeping city accompanied me. Other times, there was nothing but a deep, almost crushing silence. And in those moments, I felt as if the world was made just for me, as if I was the sole inhabitant of a universe suspended in time. There was something magical about those nighttime runs. The fresh air hitting my face, the empty streets, and the calm that seemed to envelop everything helped clear my mind. I could think about my problems, or sometimes not think about anything at all. It was a way to release the tension built up throughout the day. But that night, something changed. I remember it being colder than usual. I put on a light jacket and stepped out, confident that it would be just another typical night. It was around 11 p.m., and as usual, the neighborhood was quiet. Most houses had their lights off, and only a few scattered streetlights illuminated the streets. I started running along my usual route, which took me through empty avenues and dark alleys I knew by heart. But from the first step, I noticed something different. At first, I attributed it to fatigue. I hadn't been getting enough rest for a few days, and I thought that strange feeling of unease that accompanied me was just a product of my exhaustion. However, the feeling intensified. My feet hit the pavement with the same rhythm as always, but something in the atmosphere had shifted. It felt like the night itself was watching me. I took out my headphones, letting the total silence surround me. I wanted to listen. I wanted to understand what was wrong. I looked around. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first glance. Just the long shadows cast by the streetlights, the echo of my steps in the empty streets, and the wind that, suddenly, felt much colder. I didn't see or hear anything unusual, but the feeling of being watched persisted. A shiver ran down my spine, and although I tried to ignore it, I couldn't shake it off. Something wasn't right. I kept running, but more cautiously now. That's when I saw it. In the distance, a shadow. It was a solitary figure, standing on a corner, right where the light from a street lamp barely reached. I could make out a hat on its head, and although the darkness obscured most details, something about that figure filled me with irrational panic. I told myself it was just another person walking through the streets, someone else who might also be enjoying the nighttime tranquility. But the fear began to settle in my stomach. I quickened my pace, without any real reason, but I did. It wasn't that I was running away, or at least that's what I wanted to believe. I just wanted to get home faster. As I ran, out of the corner of my eye, I could see the figure still there, unmoving. Despite what my rational mind told me, every time I glanced in its direction, my skin prickled. There was something unnatural about the way it stood so still, as if the night itself had created it to be there watching me. I decided to turn down a side street, a detour I didn't usually take, but one that would shorten my way home. As I did, I stole a quick glance back. I didn't see the figure. Relief washed over me momentarily. Maybe I had taken a different path, or maybe it had all just been a product of my imagination. I tried to convince myself of that as I kept running, but the unease lingered. The new street I was running down was darker than the last. Only a few flickering streetlights illuminated the way, and most of the houses seemed abandoned, without a single light on. The silence was almost suffocating, and despite being alone, I felt a pressure in my chest, as if something or someone was getting closer. Then I saw it again, the same figure, the man with the hat. This time he wasn't far off. He was standing right at the end of the street, beneath a street lamp that cast a silhouette into sharp relief. And once again he wasn't moving. He was just there, watching. I felt my throat tighten and my breathing quickened. It couldn't be the same man. It was impossible for him to have gotten here so quickly. I tried to stay calm. Maybe it wasn't the same man. Maybe there were just multiple people wearing hats walking around that night. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Something in his posture, in the stillness with which he stood in that spot, told me it was him. He was waiting for me. I passed by him, keeping as much distance as possible. My heart was pounding in my chest, and though I tried not to look at him, I couldn't help it. Our eyes met, and it was at that moment I realized what had been disturbing me. His eyes weren't normal. They weren't human. They were empty, as if there was no life behind them, as if he were merely a shell, observing but without a soul. A deep sense of terror washed over me, so intense that I felt like I couldn't breathe. I picked up my pace, my legs moving almost on their own. I turned the next corner without looking back, and when I did, he was gone. The street was empty again, but the relief didn't last. The streetlights began to flicker out one by one, as if something was behind me, extinguishing everything in its wake. I couldn't explain it, but I knew it wasn't normal. Something or someone was following me, and this time it wasn't just a feeling. I could sense it. It was there in the darkness, stalking. I ran. I ran faster than I had ever run in my life. I didn't care if anyone saw me, if I looked like a madman fleeing from nothing. All I wanted was to get home, to the safety of my locked door, to the lights that might keep whatever that thing was at bay. My legs trembled. My breathing was erratic, but I kept running until I finally saw my building in the distance. The hallway lights were on, and for the first time that night, I felt a small spark of. I burst through the door, slamming it shut behind me. I leaned against the wood, trying to catch my breath, listening intently for any sound outside. Nothing, just silence. But it wasn't the comforting kind of silence. It was the same heavy, oppressive silence that had followed me all night. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up with the lights on, staring out the window of my small apartment, half expecting to see that figure again. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing at the end of the street, watching me with those hollow, lifeless eyes. I didn't know what he was, but I knew it wasn't something from this world. The next day, I tried to convince myself it had all been a bad dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But when I told a friend about what had happened, her face paled. "I've heard of him," she said quietly. "Several people in the neighborhood have seen him. Always at night, always watching. And he always disappears before anyone can get too close. Since that night, I haven't gone running after dark. I can't bear the thought that he's still out there, waiting, watching. And even though I haven't seen him again, I can still feel his presence lurking in the shadows. Because once you've seen something like that, something you can't explain, you're never the same again."